Steven Seagal challenged Bruce Lee. Then everything changed. He walked into the dojo like he owned the world. Steven Seagal, action star, 7-dan black belt, the man Hollywood called unbeatable, stood in the center of the room and said 3 words that silenced everyone. Bruce Lee? Overrated. He said it with a smirk. He said it into a microphone. He said it in front of a room full of martial arts masters, men who had trained under Bruce Lee themselves. The room didn't explode with anger. It went completely chillingly quiet because everyone knew what that kind of disrespect would cost. And what happened next? Nobody saw coming. Not Seagal, not Hollywood, and not the world. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss a single story like this. To understand what happened that day, you have to understand who Bruce Lee really was. Not the movie star, not the poster on the wall, the man. Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco in 1940, the son of a Chinese opera star. He grew up in Hong Kong, where the streets were rough and the fights were real. By his early teens, he had already been beaten badly enough, and embarrassed publicly enough, that something in him changed permanently. He didn't become angry. He became obsessed. He studied Wing Chun under the legendary IP Man. He studied boxing, fencing, and philosophy. He read everything he could get his hands on, from Western anatomy to Eastern meditation. He wasn't building a fighting style. He was building a philosophy of movement. And the philosophy was radical. Throw away everything that doesn't work. Keep only the truth. He called it Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. It wasn't a system. It was the rejection of all systems. By the time Bruce Lee arrived in Hollywood in the 1960s, he had already trained some of the greatest fighters in America, men who would go on to become legends themselves. Chuck Norris, Joe Louis, Mike Stone. They all credited him as the teacher who changed everything they thought they knew about martial arts. And then in 1973, at just 32 years old, Bruce Lee died. The cause: cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain. Sudden, unexplained, devastating. He left behind a wife, 2 young children, a half-finished film, and a legacy so powerful that even 20 years after his death, men were still measuring themselves against it, including Steven Seagal. Seagal had built his career on being the toughest man in the room. At 6 feet 4 inches with real Aikido credentials, he had become the first foreigner to operate an Aikido dojo in Japan. He had turned that physical dominance into movie stardom. Under siege, above the law, hard to kill. He was a box office machine. And he truly believed, that his skills were without equal. So when someone at a martial arts symposium in the early 1990s asked him to compare himself to Bruce Lee, Steven Seagal didn't hesitate. Bruce Lee was a performer, he said. I'm a fighter. There's a difference. The room shifted because seated in the front row was Dan and Osanto, Bruce Lee's most trusted student, his training partner, the man Bruce Lee had personally chosen to carry Jeet Kune Do forward after his death. Dan and Osanto said nothing. He simply looked at Seagal and waited. What Seagal didn't know, or chose not to consider, was the weight of what he had just said. Bruce Lee's students weren't a fan club. They were a brotherhood forged in sweat and sacrifice. Men who had spent years training under a teacher who demanded everything from them. Not just physically, but mentally and philosophically. Dan and Osanto had trained with Bruce Lee almost every day for years. He had absorbed not just the techniques but the spirit behind them. He had watched Bruce Lee do things in a gym that no camera had ever captured, movement so fast, so precise, that even trained fighters struggled to process what they had witnessed. He had heard Bruce Lee called names before. Jealousy was common. Ego was common. In the martial arts world, tall poppy syndrome was an epidemic. But this was different. This was a man with a major Hollywood platform making a public statement, and it was spreading. Word got back to the Lee family, to Shannon Lee, Bruce's daughter, to Linda Lee Cadwell, his widow, to the community of instructors worldwide who had dedicated their lives to preserving his legacy. And here's what made it sting even more. Seagal wasn't just dismissing Bruce Lee the man. He was dismissing the entire philosophical foundation that Bruce Lee had built. The idea that a smaller man, through intelligence and dedication and the ruthless pursuit of truth and movement, could defeat anyone. That wasn't just an insult to Lee. It was an insult to every person who had ever been underestimated. Over the following months, whispers turned into debates. Martial arts magazines ran features. Forums, this was the early days of the internet, exploded with arguments. And the more attention the controversy attracted, the bigger Seagal's claims grew. He had sparred with Lee. He had trained people who trained with Lee. He knew what Lee's actual skill level was, and the public had been misled by movie magic and smart camera work. The martial arts community watched with growing unease because there was one thing everyone who had actually trained with Bruce Lee knew, and it was something that couldn't be captured on film, couldn't be quantified in any magazine, and couldn't be argued away by someone who had never stood across from him. Bruce Lee's speed wasn't a camera trick. There are accounts from Jim Kelly, from Bob Wall, from men who worked with both action stars, that describe the same experience. Bruce Lee would ask you to defend yourself. You would get ready, and before your nervous system could even register that he had moved, you would feel the wind from a strike that had stopped 1 inch from your face. Not once, every time. Dan and Osanto gave an interview. He was careful, he was respectful, and he didn't name names. But he said this: Sifu Lee was the most complete martial artist I ever encountered. Anyone who spent real time on the mat with him would not make the mistake of underestimating what he was capable of. The subtext was clear to anyone paying attention, and Seagal for the first time seemed to feel it. The turning point didn't come from a fight. It came from a phone call. Shannon Lee, Bruce's daughter, who had spent years quietly and fiercely protecting her father's legacy, reached out through intermediaries. She didn't want a public confrontation. She wanted something far more powerful. She wanted the truth to speak for itself. She authorized the release of private training footage that the Lee family had kept from public view. Film that Bruce Lee had shot for his own study, not for Hollywood, not for an audience. Just a man in a garage moving. When that footage circulated among serious martial artists, and eventually reached Seagal's own inner circle, something shifted. The speed, the precision, the creativity of the combinations, these weren't movie magic. There were no camera tricks in a private garage. There was no slow motion, no editing, no stunt coordination. Just Bruce Lee, 135 pounds of concentrated intention, moving in ways that defied what the human body was supposed to be able to do. Within weeks, the conversation changed. Seagal went quiet on the subject. His people stopped giving interviews about it. The claims that had grown larger and louder gradually stopped being repeated. And then, in a moment that caught everyone off guard, Seagal appeared at a martial arts event and made a statement. I have the deepest respect for what Bruce Lee contributed to martial arts and to the world, he said. He was one of the greatest. No caveat, no qualifier, no but. For those who had watched the whole arc of the story unfold, that simple sentence carried the weight of 20 years of pride finally giving way to truth. Dan and Osanto, when told about the statement, smiled. Sifu would have appreciated that, he said. He never needed to be the best. He just needed people to keep searching. There's a reason this story has lasted decades. It's not really about martial arts. It's not about who could beat whom in a fight. It's about something Bruce Lee himself wrote in his journals. Words that his family preserved and shared with the world long after he was gone. Absorb what is useful. Discard what is not. Add what is uniquely your own. He never claimed to be the greatest. He claimed to be honest. Honest about what worked. Honest about what didn't. Honest enough to throw away 20 years of training if he found something better. Honest enough to start over every single day in pursuit of truth. That kind of honesty takes more courage than any physical skill because it requires you to be wrong publicly, repeatedly, and to keep going anyway. Steven Seagal's journey from dismissal to silence to respect is a story we've all lived in some form. The moment we realized someone we dismissed was greater than we gave them credit for. The moment pride finally stepped aside and let the truth in. It's uncomfortable, it's humbling, and it's necessary. Because here's what Bruce Lee understood that most of us take a lifetime to learn. The people who threaten you most aren't your enemies. They're your greatest teachers. They show you exactly where your ego ends and your growth begins. 20 years after Bruce Lee challenged the world to think differently about everything, about fighting, about learning, about what a human being was truly capable of, the challenge is still alive. Not because of his movies, but because of the people who were honest enough to sit with that challenge, long after it became uncomfortable. How many times in your own life have you dismissed someone, and later discovered they were the very person you needed to listen to? Share your story in the comments below. Your answer might become our next video. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, because the next story is just as powerful. There's a detail about Bruce Lee's private training that only the sharpest viewers will notice we mentioned. Go back and find it, then tell us in the comments.